Hello and welcome to Midday Report here on TVP World. I'm Marie Cato. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has arrived in Berlin for high-level talks with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. At a joint presser with the Ukrainian leader, Merz said, quote, "We are financing Ukrainian-made long-range missiles with no range limits." The Chancellor also added that Germany will do everything to make sure Nord Stream 2 is not reopened. After the meeting with Merz, the Ukrainian president will also meet Federal President Frank-Walter Steinmeier at Bellevue Palace, followed by a meeting with the president of the German Bundestag, Julia Klöckner. Before the meeting, Zelensky expressed gratitude for Merz's support, especially after the German chancellor publicly backed Ukraine's right to strike military targets inside Russia, marking a shift from Berlin's previously cautious stance. Poles are just 4 days away from picking their next president. The runoff sees Rafał Trzaskowski from the governing Civic Coalition party battling against his rival from the opposition Law and Justice Party, Karol Nawrocki.
On Sunday, Poles around the world will go to the polls to pick between two vastly different candidates. Trzaskowski, the mayor of Warsaw, represents progressive and liberal values. Trzaskowski campaigns on points such as liberalization of abortion laws, adoption of the morning after pill, and continuing the energy transition in accordance with the EU Green Deal. His opponent, Karol Nawrocki from Law and Justice, thinks differently and says he will veto the EU's Green Deal. Additionally, Nawrocki supports the introduction of a 0% income tax for families with at least 2 children. At the same time, he said that as the Polish president, he will not work towards empowering the LGBT minority, which Nawrocki calls a, quote, destructive ideology that demoralizes children in schools. Nawrocki's statement do not seem to sway Poles, as the most recent opinion poll placed him second with 45.9% of the votes. Leading the race is Trzaskowski, who, according to the polls, can count on 47.5% of support.
The U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem said that Karol Nawrocki should be the next president of Poland. Speaking at the Conservative Political Action Conference in Rzeszów in Poland's southeast, Noem also criticized Nawrocki's runoff rival and Warsaw Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski.
I just had the opportunity to meet with Karol, and listen, he needs to be the next president of Poland. Do you understand me? It matters who's in charge. I have watched over the years as socialists and people that are just like this mayor out of Warsaw, that is an absolute train wreck of a leader, have destroyed our countries because they have led by fear. They have used fear to control people, and they've used fear to promote an agenda that is not what liberty is about.
A number of U.S. Republican lawmakers penned a letter to Ursula von der Leyen, raising concerns over the EU's role in ensuring fair elections in Poland. These developments come just days ahead of the Polish presidential runoff, scheduled for Sunday, June 1st.
The letter cites recent reports that a Polish NGO with ties to a U.S. Democrat donor facilitated a social media campaign promoting centrist Civic Coalition candidate Rafał Trzaskowski and discrediting his far-right rivals. According to American lawmakers, foreign-funded political advertisements favoring Trzaskowski are a deliberate push to tilt the electoral playing field. The issue was investigated by the Polish NASK Research and Academic Computer Network, but the organization could not conclusively determine the source of the funding or rule out the possibility that it was a provocation. The organization has not published their findings yet. This is not the first time U.S. Republicans expressed interest in supporting the European far-right. Vice President J.D. Vance has met with the far-right Alternative for Germany party and slammed Romania's courts for annulling the country's presidential election last November after evidence of foreign interference in the campaign was found.
According to the spokesperson for the Polish Ministry of the Interior, the Law and Justice presidential candidate Karol Nawrocki received a negative security recommendation from Poland's Internal Security Agency in 2021. However, in spite of this ruling, the agency's head at the time gave Nawrocki a full security clearance. During the presidential campaign, Nawrocki has been facing heavy accusations from the ruling party and the opposition, including backlash from his semi-legal takeover of a government-owned low-income apartment belonging to an elderly man. Members of the Law and Justice Party defended Nawrocki by saying that if the allegations were true, the man would have never received a security clearance necessary to serve as the chair of the Institute of National Remembrance. But the new revelations cast doubt on this line of defense. China has been identified as responsible for a malicious cyber campaign targeting one of the unclassified networks of the Czech Foreign Ministry. The Czech Foreign Ministry has confirmed they have summoned the Chinese ambassador to the Czech Republic over the cyber attacks. The European Union's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, took to social media to express her support for Prague and to announce her full statement on the matter, calling the attacks a clear and unacceptable violation of international norms. Kallas added that in recent years, malicious cyber activities linked to China and targeting EU member states have increased. NATO has also released a statement condemning the Chinese attack, saying such campaigns aim to destabilize the alliance and expressing serious concern over what they called a growing pattern of similar attacks. U.S. Special Envoy for Ukraine and Russia, Keith Kellogg, replied to Dmitry Medvedev's threats of another world war. In a post on social media, Kellogg called the former Russian Prime Minister's words reckless and unfortunate.
Medvedev, currently the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, took to X to respond to Donald Trump's comments about, quote, really bad things happening to Russia. Medvedev wrote that the only really bad thing Medvedev knows is World War III. Today, midnight, Keith Kellogg offered a response. Replying on Twitter, Kellogg said that Medvedev's comments were unbecoming of a world power. Moreover, Donald Trump's envoy for Russia and Ukraine wrote that the U.S. is still waiting for Russian terms for a ceasefire promised a week ago.
Residents of Moscow and neighboring regions woke up to air raid sirens as a wave of Ukrainian drones approached the city. In the aftermath of the attack, a fire broke out in an industrial park in the Russian capital Zelenograd district. So far, the authorities reported no casualties. Footage of the attack quickly spread through Russian social media. Videos showed the drones flying over Moscow and one falling on an industrial facility. Around midnight, Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin reported drones approaching the Russian capital. According to Sobyanin, a total of 33 UAVs were shot down by air defense systems. Additionally, the drone strike prompted Russian officials to suspend operations at Moscow's Vnukovo, Zhukovsky, and Sheremetyevo airports. Representing the European Union, Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski traveled to Colombo on Wednesday for a 4-day visit aimed at strengthening ties between Sri Lanka and the bloc. In Sri Lanka's capital, Sikorski met with his counterpart Vijitha Herath. The two officials discussed Sri Lanka's relations with the European Union. Poland currently holds the rotating EU presidency, and Colombo is hoping that Sikorski's visit will help with Sri Lanka's push to retain the EU's generalized scheme of Preferences Plus, which gives developing countries a special incentive to pursue sustainable development and good governance. On Thursday, the second day of his visit, the Polish foreign minister will meet with Sri Lankan President and Prime Minister for talks. During his trip, Sikorski will also deliver a lecture at the Lakshman Gadirgamar Institute on Poland's political transformation. And now let's turn to the upcoming Polish presidential election. A record-breaking number of Poles have registered to take part in the second round abroad. Poles all over the world will be able to cast their ballots on Sunday, June 1st. Over 695,000 people have completed their voting abroad registration. The news was shared by the Polish Foreign Ministry at a press briefing held on Wednesday. This is an increase compared to just over 500,000 people who registered to cast their ballots in the first round. The number of voters outside Polish borders can still rise on the day of the vote itself. You can cast a vote even if you haven't successfully registered on the condition you have a valid certificate of your right to vote. In the first round of the election, some 17,000 people voted this way abroad. You can obtain this certificate before the end of the day on Thursday, May 29th. Spanish and British football fans have clashed in Poland's Wrocław ahead of the game between Real Betis and Chelsea London.
The fights erupted in one of the city's squares. The fans reached for garden furnitures and bottles from nearby restaurants and bars. The clashes even reached the Market Square in Wrocław, transformed into a fan zone for the UEFA Conference League. Polish police had to step in and utilize force to break up the fighting. Over 2,000 additional police officers are present in Wrocław to ensure safety for game-related events. The match between the Spanish and English teams is set to take place at 9 p.m. on Wednesday.
The European Space Agency is planning to go to the moon, and we know a possible date. Our reporter Sonia Gatabiszczan is at the EU Space Days, a conference organized in Gdańsk under the auspices of the Polish presidency of the Council of the European Union. And there she found out more about it.
Europe is going to the moon, and we explore this further here at the EU Space Days conference in the Polish city of Gdańsk. To get the latest on this, we spoke with Tony Torken-Nielsen from the European Space Agency.
We are back with Ariane 6. It's functional, and we are now ramping up the production up to 9 Ariane 6 and maybe 10 per year. And that will guarantee our access to space for the coming decade. Now there's a new context for Europe. We have been relying very much on the United States for a long time. And space is part of any security posture. And we have now realized that we must take care of our own security. And for that, we need a very important space infrastructure to ensure this security of our citizens.
Ariane 6, a mock-up of which you can see over here, is a European launcher which had its inaugural flight in July last year. The European Space Agency is planning to ramp up production of this rocket up to 9 or 10 per year. From Gdańsk, for TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatabiszczan.
And on that exciting note, we wrap up Midday Report here on TVP World. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for more on TVP World. Goodbye.